What it means is that we are decentralizing the whole company. We are ultimately going to dismantle the entire ShapeShift corporate structure, the entity, all contracts, all employment formally with all formal employees, close down our bank accounts, like the company entity will be gone. And at the same time, the product is changing into fully open source and community governed. So ShapeShift, the product, lives on as a decentralized product that is governed by all the holders of the Fox token. And ShapeShift, the entity, is wound down and eliminated.
I live unbanked off of cryptocurrency, and I use Bitrefill extensively because it lets me pay with crypto at places that don't yet accept it directly. This one service, more than any other, helps me live on crypto, pay your prepaid phone bill, or buy gift cards to thousands of major retailers around the world, all with cryptocurrency, including for exact amounts so you don't have to buy more gift credit than you need for a specific purchase. You can use Bitrefill without an account, but if you get an account, you can earn rewards points, which translate to savings, and you can also hold a balance denominated in dollars or euros to protect yourself against market crashes. Go to bitrefill.com, click Create Account, and enter the referral code DCN, or follow the link in the description. Hey everyone, I have the fantastic pleasure of speaking with the one and only Erik Voorhees, a crypto pioneer and new person in the DAO ecosystem, I suppose. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so basically, I've been watching ShapeShift for a long time because I've been using crypto for about 8 years, and in the early days, ShapeShift was the absolute ticket for swapping between coins, especially when the whole multi-coin atmosphere kind of came around. And because I live unbanked off of crypto, I don't do KYC stuff, I kind of dropped off when ShapeShift kind of went in that direction. And then with the whole DEX move, I started to get interested again. But it wasn't until this latest DAO thing that I really thought I had to talk to you about this. So, yeah, do you want to explain really quick why did you decide that you're shifting ShapeShift, pardon the pun, into a DAO?
Yeah, well, so as you mentioned, we had started integrating decentralized exchanges into ShapeShift earlier this year. First with a 0x aggregation, which allowed our users to trade Ethereum and ERC20 assets in a decentralized way with no KYC. And then in April, when Thorchain launched, we integrated that as well, which allowed us to entirely end the trading we were doing with customers and instead let those customers go directly to the decentralized protocol. So at that point, in April of this year, we had no more KYC and we did no more trades with any users. So this most recent announcement is, an expansion of that, but essentially what it means is that we are decentralizing the whole company. So that's like very much a buzzword, but this is the real deal. We are ultimately going to dismantle the entire ShapeShift corporate structure, the entity, all contracts, all employment formally with all formal employees, close down our bank accounts, like the company entity will be gone. And at the same time, the product is changing into fully open source and community governed. So ShapeShift, the product, lives on as a decentralized product that is governed by all the holders of the Fox token. And ShapeShift, the entity, is wound down and eliminated. And so this announcement was the start of this process. We haven't done this yet. We are beginning, and over the next 3 to 9 months, all these steps will be taken.
Yeah, so the big question is why. Now, I've heard people mention principles, and then obviously, especially Twitter is an interesting place where everyone has an opinion on ulterior motives that might be like, oh, his company couldn't make the company work anymore. This is like a last-ditched effort to get some clout and pump some token and kind of get exit gracefully. Kind of this is the fun way of failing, so to speak. So where is the truth in all of this? So like, what were the primary motivations for going this route?
Yeah, I think if anyone has followed our history, they understand that ShapeShift has had a really rough few years. That's certainly no secret. What I saw starting last year is the preponderance of these decentralized protocols, how good their UX was, how fast they were growing, and ultimately how well they aligned with the ethos of crypto, which is to be open, borderless, immutable, to not censor transactions, to maintain the privacy of their users. And I just saw that as like that's the future, and then asked myself deeply, to what degree can ShapeShift do that? And a year ago, I thought the answer was we can't. I don't know how ShapeShift could decentralize itself. That doesn't make any sense to me. But learning more about these things and then working on it over the last 9 months, we figured out how to answer all the questions. And ultimately, that's what we're doing. So, yeah, I mean, this is a very radical move for the company. And I hope that if it's successful, it will help be a guide or a inspiration to other companies, especially those in the crypto space, to show them a new form of economic organization. And I think that could be quite revolutionary. So we're going to pioneer forward and see to what degree we can do it.
Yeah. So how in this case does well, first, how does the structure of this DAO that we're going for, how does it kind of look?
Yeah. So the DAO at the most simple is just a Ethereum smart contract that holds a bunch of Fox tokens. That's sort of the treasury. And people can propose things that that treasury should do. If the proposal becomes serious and a lot of people seem to support it, then it goes to actually a formal vote. And the formal vote takes a snapshot of a current Ethereum block height, looks at the Fox token value of each user that votes at that block height, and based on the outcome of that vote, actual on-chain transactions of funds can move. And so that's the most simple sort of core of this form. And that can serve anything from like, a developer that finds a little bug and wants $1,000 to fix it, to a professional marketing services agency that says, hey, ShapeShift, I will grow your user base by 10x over the next year. Give me, $2 million to do that. And that's the new structure. So it all comes down to blockchain-based voting, and it's the governance that arises through that versus the governance that arises through a normal shareholder and executive team structure.
Yeah. So how does that, first off, is there a lot of Shapeshift's current, obviously structure, but a lot of its current, for example, team and mission and stuff that will just not be part of this thing because it's a radically new thing? Or are you hoping to kind of get just about everyone migrated to a decentralized version, and then it's just a gear shift, but it's otherwise kind of the same large group of people or whatever?
In the best case, it is all the best parts of ShapeShift that can now live more freely and more productively, and removes all the corporate cruft and baggage and friction that being a centralized entity has. So, I think it's unlikely that all current ShapeShift employees are just working for ShapeShift a year from now in a decentralized way. I think some of them will be in a very full-time way, myself included. Some of them will be casually or part-time when they wish, and others will move on to other projects. A lot of people want a very clear and predictable W-2 paycheck, and so that's very understandable, and those people will find jobs at other places.
Yeah. So this is a question that doesn't necessarily need to have an answer in today's day and age for for the way the space works. But what's the revenue model? Now, of course, if a lot of DAOs, you just have a lot of tokens, you issue them, and then the market value determines, the value, and the revenue model is essentially, sorry for being crass, but pump the token, right? That's just the
Mm-hmm.
one way you make money, and that's a radically different departure from the old school model of you make revenue by accruing customers and fees. And obviously, in an ideal sustainable world, even a DAO would work this exact same way, or not exactly, but it would have an actual, you give value to customers, they pay you value back, and then that kind of works. So how do you kind of envision that shaping up for ShapeShift?
Yeah, I mean, a good example here is like Bitcoin itself, right?
Hmm.
Really, as the first truly decentralized protocol. And what is Bitcoin's revenue model? Well, one is the token rises, right? And it's created $1 trillion of value over 10 years. And it has a fee associated with each transaction. And that fee is based on a number of variables. The fee ends up paying the miners, but ultimately, regardless of what the fee is, where the value really comes from is when the token value increases, right? So that starts with Bitcoin. In ShapeShift's case, today there is no fee anywhere on the platform. So we have the ability for people to trade through decentralized exchanges, and there's no additional fee, there's no additional spread on that rate.
Mm.
And so that's really like a simple starting point. Whether we add fee in the future is up to the token holders. So they can vote, if in a month or a year or 10 years, if they want to have a fee on the platform, they can vote on that. And that's not up to me or anyone at the current company today.
Yeah, so the idea would be to give like an analog to the traditional system. Right now is kind of the startup phase where the money you get is from seed capital or people throwing money into the token, hoping that it'll be more valuable in the future, obviously. And maybe down the line, again, not guaranteed, but maybe down the line, then they implement a revenue model once it's grown big and universal enough that then pays actual revenue into the DAO.
Yeah. And today, even if prices of the token don't rise or even if they fall, the DAO itself has, $1 to $300 million of capital. So it is, let's put it this way, it is better funded than ShapeShift as a startup ever has been in the
Yeah.
past, right? And that's with no fees at all. So it can perpetuate and grow as an organization and as a product for quite a long time. And as it builds out, there are a number of ways to attach certain revenue drivers into the platform, and the community can vote how and when and to what degree to do that.
Yeah, and that's a pretty fascinating whole setup. So now we're getting to a little bit of the challenges and the things. First off, do you obviously Thorchain is a big innovator in the space, and it's a big glimmer of hope for a lot of people, and it's also gone through its own little bit of midair turbulence, so to speak. And
Yeah, understatement.
yeah, and so the thing that when the DAO hype came many years ago with Ethereum, the big kind of damper on that excitement ended up being when you have a human corporation. The legal systems are I don't maybe not perfect, but they're well figured out, and then you have humans making executive decisions. There's the ability of centralization in some ways provides a great method of quality control, or basically keeping things running. And when you just let code be law, sometimes you have something horrendous happen. And so, well, first off, do you have any anxiety about something like that happening with the Shapeshift DAO, where something doesn't work out in the code, and then something catastrophic happens, and then I don't know how have you kind of prepared for that?
Yeah, good question. We've always been non-custodial, which means that we don't hold any customer funds ever. So users are always in control of their keys. And why that is important is to protect those users from any mess up in our code, right? And that is true of ShapeShift in its centralized closed source form, and will be true of ShapeShift in the open source form. I think as we move from closed source to open source with time, that software will get more secure and have far more eyes on it and become more robust. But regardless of that, like, we can't hold people's money, and that's the ultimate safeguard. If someone has to trust their money to a counterparty, then that kind of code situation matters a lot. I mean, in Thorchain's case, they have these liquidity pools that hold, hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto. That has to be absolutely robust and safe. In our case, we don't have to meet that standard because we're not holding funds of users. But regardless, as it open sources, I think it'll get more and more secure anyway.
Okay, so now about the challenges of running things in a DAO sort of a way. And so for full, my own story, way back in 2016, I started working for the Dash DAO, probably one of the first, at least the most enduring DAO from the early days. And
Hmm.
just in like the DAO in the rough, right? You same thing. You put in a proposal, and then stakeholders vote, and if it's funded, it just gets dropped out of the block reward, and then no one can stop it. And I do remember, for example, my partner back in the day, he had some issues with Changely, I believe. It's
Hmm.
trying to do a transaction where at a certain level, they're like, well, we need to see where these funds come from. And then it's just like, okay, this is awkward. How do I explain that they came from the sky? Like the, and it
Yeah.
just it just bends traditional corporations' minds around that this is just like, well, who paid you? Who's the organization? There is none. It's just from the sky. And so, have you thought of either on a personal level, but also on a company wide level, or other people involved with the DAO, how you would handle these challenges of working between two worlds that are completely, in this case, in this radical DAO case, do not interface at all?
Yeah. Great question. Um, so we are setting up a foundation, which is intended first to be temporary, 1 to 5 years of lifespan. That foundation will have, it is explicitly centralized, and it will have the ability to do those things which the DAO cannot do in a decentralized way yet. So we don't have answers to all the different pieces of how we decentralize Shapeshift today. We have a lot of the answers, but over time, we'll be able to have the foundation do things which the DAO cannot. Ultimately, the goal here, the real experiment, is to see to what degree the DAO can actually just become everything. And I think there's a pretty good chance that it can get there. You mentioned, some kind of contract relationship with Changely.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of these DeFi projects, they don't have contracts with each other, even though they are integrating with each other. They're just open source and composable. So there's no like business meeting that has to happen between people to sign a deal on certain terms and a contract that has to get upheld. All that matters is whether the code is running and whether it works as you intend it. So it's kind of a real, it's an elegant way of business interaction to happen. And I think ultimately is very superior to the normal 20th century kind of corporate relationships that don't need to occur anymore.
Yeah, do you think that this will lead to a lot of Shapeshift former employees or new employees of the DAO becoming unbanked or just exiting that financial system entirely and trying it out in the Wild West kind of situation?
Yeah, some of them. It's like we have 67 employees, something like that right now, and so there's a bell curve. Some of them are completely enamored with the entire crypto lifestyle, and they've been pretty unbanked for a while. Some of them are far more traditional, and I don't think would be comfortable doing that with or without Shapeshift decentralizing. But I think what this has done, especially for our employees, is push their own comfort zone and push their own boundaries and show them like, hey, there is actually a way to organize around a token instead of a base of shareholders. And it gets them thinking, as I think it gets people watching what we're doing thinking about how much can actually be decentralized. I think
Mm.
the project of crypto broadly is a quest to see how much can be decentralized. And that started with just base money with Bitcoin, but it's not ending with base money. We're going to see a lot of other structures and relationships between people that we can decentralize.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds exciting. Now for the tough part, one I've always described the DAO as, whenever people are trying to, it's great to talk about as a great concept, and then when people say, hey, should I put in a proposal, I should do this too, sounds cool, I always get a little bit of look of terror because I know it's a little bit of a thunderdome in there. So
Yeah.
for basic, and of course, it's just because it's so wild and free, anyone can do something. It's basically the token distribution thing is especially interesting because on paper it sounds good, but because of the whole early days status that we're in, let's just say someone on a whim decides to run a laptop and mine Bitcoin back in the day when you could do that on a small laptop. And then the price goes exponentially high. And then he just says, oh, let me take this other token. Like, let me throw some into this dark coin. And then it turns into Dash. Oh, now I have like a, 10, 20 master nodes or whatever. And then now I have a significant pull on what happens with people. But I'm a sociopath. I'm a complete, like, I never held down a real full job. I just, by pure luck, I end up all these tokens. Now I control people's livelihoods. And then you just basically can have maybe a hacker then steals someone's money and then just uses that to become, if they aren't recovered, of course, use that to become part of the governance process. And there can, especially in the early days, it can end up being like, I mean, I've seen the comment threads under your tweets, and now you work for those people now. So that can be a little terrifying. Have you given much
Yeah,
thought of how to navigate that sort of a thing?
yeah. I think anyone in crypto understands that people build these projects in adversarial conditions,
Mm-hmm.
and a decentralized project has to be able to operate in adversarial conditions where you can't know and trust all the parties. If it can't do that, then the project will fail in a decentralized model. So yeah, by opening up ShapeShift, we are opening ourselves up to that world and to that model. But for every bad person, in your anecdotes, there are generally 10 great people that you may never have found that couldn't work for you as a normal employee in the past, or that there's no way you would have ever engaged with them. And suddenly out of nowhere, you have an amazing contributor who is adding tons of value to the project. And that, I think, is a very special thing. Um, Being open, anyone in the world who likes what we're doing, who likes our vision, who likes our product, can now have a actual stake in ShapeShift. That was never possible before. And certainly someone who doesn't like what we're doing is probably not going to hold or own any of the Fox token. And so there's a certain degree of self-selection in which those people won't be very involved in the project, and those who do like it will be. I think over time that can be very good, but it's not a panacea. And you're right, like it can cause problems. But same with like in a centralized company, you can have psychopaths in a centralized company that cause all sorts of mayhem as well.
Yeah, and that makes me think of the devil in the details. You can have the most, let's just say, decentralized system in the world. Let's just say a Bitcoin base. Take like the Bitcoin SV example. Yet, if you have one mining pool that controls 70+% of the hash rate or whatever, and I'm not up on the exact details of when or how that could have happened, it doesn't exactly act as a decentralized organization, even though it is on paper. And so the devil in the
Mm-hmm.
details of decentralized governance is token distribution, to be honest. So if, for example, uh, there's a poor or a not well thought out or whatever distribution of the Fox token, you could have basically a few people. I mean, in a good bad world, it would be you and your homies get like 60% of the tokens. But in a bad world, it would be some other random person who, is maybe a maximalist, doesn't like you, just manages to do this because he wants to see you fail. And now you got 60% ownership by 60% vote by some entity that, is basically wants to run this thing into the ground and surely will. So obviously with that little bit of like, sorry for the FUD there, but with that little bit of a twist, what have you thought about how to make sure the token is distributed in a kind of fair and decentralized sort of a way, or a way that makes it so that it's representative of the intent, which is actual people who care about the project for the most part get to direct it?
Yeah. So we've had the Fox token has existed for about 2.5 years, and we held over 99% of it through that whole time. So it was entirely centralized with ShapeShift, and we were just holding on to it. Um, so basically, any improvement from there is pretty easy. And the way we thought about this was first of all, we want this thing to be actually decentralized, not just decentralized in name. And that means, at least at minimum, that non-insiders have to have the majority of the coins. So through the airdrop and through the DAO treasury, more than half of the coins, I think around 60%, went out to the community. And those are all unlocked and available immediately upon that airdrop day 2 weeks ago. All the insiders, their coins are all locked over 3 years. So they unlock every Ethereum block a little increment. And they basically align all the insiders with the long-term motive, in the best interest of the project. So that was one way that we did it. And, I think ultimately, as the airdrop expires in 90-ish days, anything that's unclaimed ends up back in the treasury. And then, from there, the distribution is uncontrollable. It's just market participants buying and selling over time. And who knows where that ends up.
Yeah. So I mean that's definitely a stable kind of way of doing things. Now, one more question on the way the DAO works. One thing that I think was not necessarily well thought through in every way, or rather could not be solved at a primitive stage, is communication. Because when you have a group of shareholders, they're real people, their full legal name, I suppose. You know how to get in contact with them. You can summon a shareholders meeting, however that works. With the DAO, it's just tokens. And then a lot of times you can have votes, which, first off, people who just completely disengage is, oh, I didn't know there was a vote to like dismantle the entire company and burn it to the ground. I would have showed up and voted against that if only I knew. Or there's cases of people just voting, but the vote doesn't mean what you think it does. Like they're saying, oh, I really love this proposal, but I don't want them to get a big head, so I'm going to vote against it. And just to send a message like that. Or they vote for or against for a reason you might not even know about. And as such, communicating with these people, these token holders, is key, but in a lot of cases, it's not built into the protocol. So do you have any ideas of improving this, or how you'd be able to make sure you're actually communicating to the token holders and not kind of relying on well, let's shout out on Reddit and see who responds?
Yeah, one of the things that helped us feel comfortable to start this process was the tools that have been built for DAOs and for decentralized communities. Tools that generally didn't exist, even a year ago. So right now we use a couple. One's called Boardroom and one's called Snapshot. And these tools are a really good way of curating the noise into productive discussion and then executing on actual votes. So far, it's worked really well, but we just started. It's been like 2 weeks. So I think as more and more people try to build DAOs, and as that becomes a larger thing, the tools to help DAOs communicate well, to govern well, will get built. And so that's just one of our assumptions, is that is going to be a growing industry itself, and we'll use the best tools that we can find.
Now, do you know, finally, any other projects that are going in this direction? Obviously, there's a lot of cryptocurrency protocols that could be considered a DAO in some way, shape, or form. But we're a totally centralized company, but we're moving to radical decentralization in this way, in a non analog way, in a fully digital way, just giving ourselves up to the code. Do you know of any other big projects to be on the lookout that are transitioning from an actual corporation into a DAO?
I'm not aware of any that are a formal established company doing a complete and full transition into a DAO. I may not know of some examples out there, and if anyone in your audience knows about them, please let me know, because I'm curious about this whole field. There are a number of projects in the DeFi world that are sort of like, they have a dual mode. They both have a decentralized protocol. So Uniswap is a good example of this. A decentralized immutable protocol that's open source and lives on the blockchain, and a centralized company with an office and staff. To my knowledge, that is the model they are going to continue with for a while. So they're not converting a central entity into a DAO, they are building in parallel a central company called Uniswap and a decentralized organization also called Uniswap. And I think that that model is pretty common. But we'll see like kind of what they plan to do in the future with that.
Yeah. So I guess finally, how do you see regulators considering all this, which of course is the big question, right? It's pretty easy to convince yourself or your stakeholders or whoever else that you're a completely decentralized organization, man. There's no leaders. It's all open. Don't come after me. But the thugs like to come after someone eventually. So how have
Yeah,
you kind of thought about that?
I think the important point there is that regulation and law applies to specific facts and circumstances. And like in Shapeshift's case, it's not like us calling ourselves decentralized makes regulation go away. What makes regulation go away is when you meaning a person or an entity, stops providing regulated services. So if you stop the facts and circumstances which are regulated, in our case, it was being the counterparty to a trade with customers. When you stop that activity, that regulation no longer applies because you're not doing the activity anymore. So being decentralized simply certain regulated activities. The question for regulators will be when and to what degree they make new laws that try to regulate things that today are not. And the writing of open source code ultimately has to be what gets regulated if they're going to stop this stuff. That would be a huge in law, right? So will they want to do that? I'm sure they will. Will they be able to? Maybe, maybe not. And we don't know how long that will take or what form it will come in. So, and to those people out there who are considering it, you just have to be sure that you're not doing a regulated activity. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. So finally, where can everyone follow you guys on this glorious and terrible journey that you're embarking on?
Yeah, I would say go to shapeshift.com. Check if you got the airdrop. Over 1 million people did. So forum.shapeshift.com is where we discuss governance, and there's the Shapeshift Discord where we talk more in real time about things. So those are really the best places.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time. I hope a lot of people will follow in your footsteps if they're willing to take the heat.
Yeah, I think ultimately it will be a path of less heat.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to aspire to for sure, and I hope it turns out that way. Well, have a good one, and thanks again for chatting.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel.